Hello everyone and welcome to the third game we're covering from round 7 of this year's FIDE Grand Swiss. Everyone is trying to qualify for the candidates and everyone, of course, wants to win every game. It is Ediz Gurel versus Gukesh Dommaraju. Gukesh coming off of 2 losses and Ediz having an okay event. He only lost to Jani Pomniš in round 2. Other than that, no losses for him. And it's a pretty wild game. So let's check it out. Ediz with white opens with pawn to e4. He was the highest rated Turkish player now, that is Yavuz Khan, even though Yavuz Khan is only a little bit high rated, but he is 14, Ediz is currently 16, but still both incredible talents. Gukesh is already 19 compared to them. We have pawn to c6, Gukesh goes for the Caro-Kann, pawn to d4, pawn to d5, and pawn to e5. The advanced variation, like I said, I used to always go for knight to c3, but now I also enjoy this pawn to e5 move with bishop to f5 and pawn to h4 followed by pawn to h5. This is the most common counter to the Tal variation against the Caro-Kann. And I already mentioned, if you haven't, first thing in the description below, download Lotus Chess. In it you will find some incredible lines, especially here featured about the Caro-Kann. There are some many wild lines where, let's say, pawn to h6 is played, which is a perfectly fine move for black, in fact. g4, and after bishop goes all the way to h7, e6. And now it's very, very difficult for black to make moves. For example, captures, you go bishop to d3, and now it's best to play e5, but no one really does this. People just capture on d3 because they're used to doing that when playing the Caro-Kann, and now black is as good as lost. For example, if knight f6, already knight f3. You can't capture because of check and you lose the knight, and the knight is coming to e5, you'll control f7, d7, the queen is coming to g6, so this is game over. Even with engine level play from black, for example, king f7, knight e5 check, king to g8, and knight g6. Okay, black can play this without a bishop and the rook ever entering the game. So if you can get it up to this point, I'm sure you will win incredible games. But here, h5 at the top level is the most popular, of course. We have pawn to c4, pawn to e6, and knight to c3. We have knight to e7, knight g to e2, and knight to d7. We have knight to g3 attacking the bishop, and bishop to g6. We have bishop to g5, again another standard move against the Caro-Kann, and queen to b6 unpinning, putting pressure on the b2 pawn, and the Ediz offers it, just plays rook to c1. And you could capture on b2, there's nothing wrong with it, something like captures, bishop to d3, you trade captures, now something like d captures, queen captures, and knight to b6, and black is perfectly fine, getting the other knight over to d5. It's quite an enjoyable position. But Gukesh strikes with pawn to f6 first. We have e captures on f6, g captures, and now bishop back to e3. Queen captures on b2, and now c captures on d5. We have knight captures on d5, knight captures, and e captures on d5, followed by bishop to d3 now. So a very rare instance of you playing bishop to d3 against the Caro-Kann on move 15. And there are a couple of games where bishop captures on d3 was played. Also, queen b4 check is a known move, but Gukesh plays bishop to b4 check, and it is now as of move 15 that we have a completely new game. And look at the situation on the clocks. They're both above an hour and 40 minutes on the clock, which means they're just blitzing out moves. This is still all preparation. Okay, king to f1, and now bishop captures on d3. We have queen captures on d3, and now castles queenside from Gukesh. Again, not burning any time, so this is still all preparation. Rook to b1, attacking the queen, queen a3, and the rook to b3. Again, not wasting any time, queen to a4, and king to g1. All preparation. We have bishop to d6 by Gukesh, and now comes knight to f5. So this is the first move where Ediz burns a little bit of time, puts pressure on the bishop, and gets the knight to a very favorable f5 square. We have bishop to c7 by Gukesh, pawn to g3, and now knight to b6. The first move where Gukesh actually spent some time. We have king to g2, and now knight to c4, rook h to b1, rook to a1, also very much playable. You just defend that pawn, and you have no worries, but Ediz decides to go active. He goes after the b7 pawn, pawn to b6, and now defends it with pawn to a3. We have rook d to e8. Gukesh now goes after that e-file and bishop to h6. Ediz says that he wants to play bishop to g7 and just pick up the f6 pawn. And you could definitely play some like king b7 and allow it. Some like bishop to g7, rook g to e8, captures, and you put the other rook on f8, and you have control of the two semi-open files in front of the white king. This is definitely compensation enough for the f6 pawn. But Gukesh decided to go rook to e4, and now comes queen to d1. Here also there's a very tricky rook c3. You could use it to maybe remaneuver your pieces more fluently, as there's a pretty big threat now. If black plays, let's say, a silly move, then the threat is just rook to b4. And now you cannot avoid losing the game. Whatever you play, just rook captures on c4, and if captures, you lose the full rook on e4. So after bishop to h6, we have this rook to e4 move, like we said, and queen to d1. Ediz does not go for this rook to c3 move, and Gukesh immediately moves the knight. Knight a5, attacks the rook, rook to f3, and now queens get traded off the board. Queen captures, we have rook captures on d1, and rook to h7, both of them now spending a fair amount of time. Bishop to g7 going after the f6 pawn, and Gukesh defends it. Rook to e6. We have bishop to f8, now preparing knight g7, and Gukesh activates the knight. Knight c4. We have knight to g7 going after the rook on e6, rook to e2, getting the rook out of harm's way, and now king to f1, attacking the rook, and rook to d2, offering a trade. Ediz, of course, declines. We have rook to e1. Now you can get the rook over to the back rank. And rook captures on d4 by Gukesh. He doesn't mind a rook e8 check, as for the moment you can put your king on b7, and maybe then rook captures on f6, but it seems like black should be able to play this. But even that Ediz does not go for. He plays the rook captures on f6 first, and now we have pawn to c5 by Gukesh. Rook to f5, going after the d5 pawn and the h5 pawns. Knight to d2 check. We have king to g2, and now knight to e4. Closing of the e-file, so there is no more rook to e8 with check. And now just knight captures on h5. Okay, we have pawn to c4. Gukesh has a passed pawn, so he starts advancing it. Knight to f6. Offering a trade, we have captures, captures, and now comes rook to d3. This is a loss of a tempo for Gukesh. Rook to d2 will be much better, would be much better, but yeah, I guess he was planning on going for rook captures on a3. But now we have pawn to h5, and you're not in time to capture on a3, and for the moment it's defended by the bishop. So rook d3 doesn't really make all that much sense. We have bishop to d8, attacking the rook, rook to f5, and now pawn to c3. We have pawn to h6. Ediz also starts advancing his passed pawn, and pawn to d4. We have rook to c1, and now rook to d2. You just can't advance those pawns without moving the rook, so the rook was always supposed to be on d2. And now we have king to f1. Also, bishop g7 does trap the rook on h7, if you're wondering about that, but then pawn to c2, and this is now practically winning for black. So after rook d2, we have king to f1, and now we have bishop to e7, offering a trade of bishops. Interestingly, now if you go pawn to d3 with the king on f1, you can just go rook captures on c3, and there's nothing for black here, even though as it comes with check, so there's no rook to d1. So that's the idea. So after king f1, we have bishop to e7, and now pawn to g4, and the question is, what can Gukesh play here? Well, there are a couple of moves that he could consider. He could go king b7 to activate a little bit. He could also just trade on f8. Bishop captures, rook captures, and now after king to b7, it looks scary, g5, but you can give up the rook for the 2 pawns, and it's not a problem. For example, rook to b2, pawn to g6, rook captures on h6, pawn to g7, rook g6, and now you give up the rook for the pawns, but now white will also have to give up one of the rooks. d3, rook captures on c3, d2, sorry, not d2, rook to b1 check, of course, and after the king moves, now pawn to d2. And now after rook to d8 check, you win one of the rooks, and okay, this is now a draw. So that's definitely possible, but Gukesh wanted to win, and he gave up the bishop for the 2 pawns, for the a pawn and for the h pawn. And okay, what is this? Bishop captures on a3, rook captures on h6, and now pawn to g5. Challenging the rook, we have rook to g6, stopping the pawn, and now king to g2. And here, Gukesh could maybe still bounce back and get back into the game with something like king to b7, but still very unlikely. He plays rook to g7, and now there's a very, very clear way of activating that bishop. Now the bishop comes to d6, so you've lost control of that square, and now the bishop comes to f4. We have pawn to a5. Gukesh starts pushing his pawn. Bishop to f4, and now rook to d3. Again, the rook forced from the d2 square. Rook to b1, and he was in this position on move 52 that world classical champion Gukesh Dommaraju resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. So a tough third row in a loss for Gukesh, but okay, Ediz does take down the world champion, so good for him. And yeah, you resign here because there's no move you can make. It's just a terrible position. You have 2 pawns for the piece, but it means nothing. Your b6 pawn is attacked. If you defended king b7, just rook f6, and you can no longer defend it. For example, pawn to c2, you can attack, and now you give a check. King moves, let's say king to c8. Now you even run into some checkmating action. Rook to b8 check, king d7, rook b7 check. You have to move, you lose the rook on g7. And now, even if rook e3 trying to queen the pawn, white no longer needs that pawn, just bishop d6. And okay, you can bring a queen into the game, but this will be checkmate. So yeah, very, very tough loss for Gukesh, who is doing okay in every game, and then he just seemingly wants more, and then he makes this silly, silly blunder. And okay, yeah, I know you guys will probably say, you know, Bobby Fischer also grabbed a pawn, where, you know, and lost the game, even though the pawn that Bobby grabbed, that was a drawn endgame. It's just that Bobby lost it. But yeah, here Gukesh just goes into a seemingly lost endgame. So it's pretty tough on the world champion. It doesn't seem like it's affecting him all that much because he does have great positions. He's playing well. He just messes up. So yeah, it's pretty tough. It's like, you know, I don't know if you've seen the interview with Anish Giri during the FIDE Grand Swiss. He constantly talks about it, like he had 4 losses in a row. And then, you know, it just something clicked, and then he just started playing well again. So I guess it does happen in these elite events with elite players. But yeah, very nicely done. And these are the standings after round 7 has been played. So if you don't want any spoilers, don't look, but I will now show them. So these are the standings. Nihal Sarin leading the tournament now after defeating Parham Maksulu with 5.5 points. No, sorry, these are not the standings. These are the results. Then Arjun Ergaisi lost to Matthias Blubaum. So Nihal and Matthias are leading the tournament. Anish drew versus Abhimanyu. Alireza defeated Nodirbek Yakubuev. Nicolas Teodoru drew against Vincent Keimer. We already talked about that. A very, very clean game from Nicolas, but also from Vincent. Nodirbek Abdusattorov defeated Amin Tabatabai. Shahriar Mamilyarov draw versus Shan Sargisyan. Hans Niemann defeated Yas Khan Erdomush. We already have shown that game. Vidit defeated Marc-André Maurizi, and Pranav drew against Jordan Pamforest, and so on. We're going to show the other pairs as well, but for the moment, that's it. I'm probably going to show more games, so we're going to discuss the final standings then. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Very nicely done by Ediz, taking down the world champion in, you know, quite a convincing manner. I would like to thank Christian Fischer, Carmen Polifronio, Austin Wheeler, Ali Urukoglu, and Joseph McArdle for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day. And if you still haven't, download Lotus Chess. First link in the description below. Learn how to play really cool fighting chess and learn some of the nice lines like the one I've shown at the beginning of the video. See you soon.